Kamala Harris has spoken out against Donald Trump about his use of photography in Arlington Cemetery. And there's a convention that people are not photographed, politicians are not photographed there. And as a president, Donald Trump would presumably know that convention. And he said that he was asked by the members of the family of the 13 men who had been killed to have his photograph taken there. And Kamala Harris thinks that this is inappropriate. There's also apparently allegations that a dispute broke out, that there was some sort of squabble. The only way to defend himself here is for Trump to say, well, look at the footage, which is ironic. And the other issue here is these 13 men died during the appalling exit from Kabul. And Trump is saying that that was something that should not have occurred and that it occurred under the Biden-Harris watch. Well, it certainly did, but it was something that was negotiated and planned by Trump. I think the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a great mistake altogether. I don't think history now records the Taliban as being honourable in agreements. The situation in Afghanistan now is about as bad as it was, or if not worse, than it was before America, the UK and the various allies went into Afghanistan. This is a country that is ruled by terror. And there are new laws which have come out requiring women to be completely veiled, to be silent, and so on. I don't see that one president can turn around and say that the other president is more to blame for this, as this is something that was planned in one presidency and executed by another. It was cack-handed, it was appalling, and there is blame spread across both administrations. If Trump wishes to acknowledge his faults in this, then I think they are easily identifiable. If you go through the process, if you look back to the withdrawal in August 2021, the complex and controversial withdrawal, it's rooted in this negotiation, in this agreement negotiated by Donald Trump, and known as the Doha Agreement, signed in 2020 in February between the United States and the Taliban, setting the stage for the eventual departure. It is not helped by the fact that Dominic Raab was sunning himself in Crete, so the Allies were not helping in the withdrawal itself. The failures are significant. There are three major failures. First, there were insufficient guarantees from the Taliban, and the Doha Agreement stipulated that the Taliban would prevent terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda from operating in Afghanistan and would engage in peace talks with the Afghan government. And the agreement didn't include enough robust mechanisms to enforce these commitments, and it failed to secure a comprehensive and an enforceable ceasefire. The second issue is the Afghan government was largely sidelined in the negotiations, undermining the legitimacy and authority of the government then in Kabul, and the exclusion weakened the Afghan state, emboldened the Taliban, who viewed the government as a puppet of foreign powers and overwhelmed it. And the third point was that the agreement set out an ambitious timeline for the US troop withdrawal, ensuring that the Taliban would fully comply with its commitments, and this created a situation where the US was bound to leave, even if the Taliban had failed to meet their obligations. And the Biden administration's intelligence assessments underestimated the speed with which the Taliban could take control again of Afghanistan, and as a result, the withdrawal was chaotic, with US forces and allies caught off guard by the rapid collapse of the Afghan provisional government. And the evacuation process itself was poorly managed, leading to chaos at Kabul airport, as thousands of Afghans and foreign nationals scrambled to flee the country and hoped that the promises made by the foreign occupying powers would be honoured. They weren't. Many Afghans who worked for the US or for its allies were left behind, facing potential retaliation from the Taliban. Disgraceful. Disgraceful behaviour both by the American forces and by the British forces. The diplomatic missteps were significant. The Biden administration struggled to coordinate with international allies and partners during the withdrawal, leading to tensions and criticism from NATO allies who were also involved in the mission. It was chaotic. I don't see that either Trump or Biden can claim any credit from any part of that process. Following the US withdrawal, the Taliban quickly reasserted control over Afghanistan, effectively undoing much of the progress that had been made in 2 decades of US and allied presence in Afghanistan, and the Taliban have reimposed many of the harsh rules that characterized their regime before the US even invaded in 2001. The severe restrictions on women, including bans on education, limits on work opportunities, mandatory adherence to strict dress codes, and the Taliban's policies have effectively erased any gains in women's rights achieved over the past 20 years in Afghanistan. The suppression of civil liberties in Afghanistan, the curtailing of freedom of speech, assembly, the press, the targeting of journalists, activists, former government officials, the enveloping of Afghanistan in an atmosphere of fear and oppression, and the reinstatement of the harsh justice from the showing the Wahhabist interpretation of Sharia law, including public executions, floggings, amputations for various offences. These actions mirror the brutal justice system that was in place before the US invasion. The US invasion of Afghanistan was initially justified as a response to the 9/11 attacks, with goals of dismantling al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban from power to prevent Afghanistan from being a haven for terrorists. Over time, the mission expanded to include national development, nation building, promoting democracy, improving human rights, particularly for women. All of that a waste of time. The campaign's objectives became increasingly diffuse and difficult to achieve, particularly as the Taliban regrouped and launched a persistent insurgency, and the Afghan government, despite receiving substantial international support, struggled with corruption and inefficiency, undermining its ability to govern effectively. Critics will argue that Trump was overly eager to secure a deal with the Taliban, leading to an agreement that lacked sufficient safeguards for Afghan stability and human rights, and it presages ill for any suggestions that Trump could arrange a peace accord quickly, hastily, between Ukraine and Russia. If this is an example of Trump's brilliant peace agreements, this is an example of something cack-handed and inadequate. By committing the US withdrawal without securing a firm Taliban commitment to peace, Trump weakened US leverage over the Taliban, allowing them to wait out the withdrawal. And Biden equally has been criticized for the chaotic manner in which the withdrawal was conducted, leading to unnecessary loss of life and a humanitarian crisis, which continues to today. And Britain must acknowledge that many Afghans remain in Afghanistan who were promised residence here. And we have been so self-obsessed, so introspective when it comes to honouring our commitment. If we can't keep the promises we made, our word isn't worth pronouncing. Our word is worth nothing. Who will trust us again? And despite signs from the Afghan government that the Afghan government was not prepared to stand on its own, Biden adhered to the withdrawal timetable without significant adjustments, resulting in this rapid Taliban takeover, a complete failure to recognize and respond to events on the ground. The US campaign in Afghanistan, which lasted over 20 years, had some success, including the dismantling of al-Qaeda's operational capabilities in the region and significant improvements in health, education and women's rights, and all of that eradicated in a couple of days while Dominic Raab sunned himself on the beach. Dominic Raab, David Davis's poodle. A really shocking indictment of inadequacy. And so many people died for that. For that. We achieved nothing. A complete waste of time. A waste of lives. Given up for what? For what? The failure to secure a stable and self-sufficient Afghan state. It raises questions about the effectiveness and sustainability of nation-building efforts and of the competence of both the Trump administration, the Biden administration, and the British administration at the time as well. The Trump and the Biden administrations both bear responsibility for the flawed processes that led to this chaotic and tragic end to the US presence in Afghanistan, and it's left the country in a situation eerily similar to where it was before the invasion. So I don't think Trump has anything to crow about. I don't think Biden or Kamala Harris have anything to crow about. This is one situation where, frankly, all the participants should have kept their head down and should have kept quiet, because none of this makes any of the central players look good.